The transition that the Windrush Generation has worked through, and in particular the transition from the Windrush Generation through the descendants of the Windrush Generation. Now, as has been very eloquently explained, these migrants arrived around in 1948, and they played a vital, crucial role in shaping modern multicultural Britain. Their transition into life in the UK was multifaceted and fraught, as you know, with many challenges across social, political, economic, religious and personal circumstances and dimensions. Yet, as we know, the legacy is continuing as the descendants are, as we might say, taking up the cudgels laid down by our elders in their fight for justice, representation and cultural affirmation as well. So I'm going to just try and go through quickly 6 areas of the transition, the dimensions of transition that our Windrush generations have moved through. First is social. So when they arrived to very deep-rooted racism. Then it wasn't prepared. British society, use the term deliberately, British society clearly wasn't prepared. It was not prepared. We're talking about 100 years of a society that had created a concept around these individuals that were coming that's very deep-rooted. They weren't welcoming to non-white immigrants here. There was hostility, segregation, and often barred from renting, as stated earlier, and barred from socialising in white-dominated spaces. They built communities whilst they were here, creating self-sustaining communities as we see here that we're in at this present time. Other areas you'll know, they're populated like down south, Brixton, Handsworth, Midlands, North Side and Manchester area. They populated all those areas. And closer afield, Deepdale, Frenchwood, Avon here in Preston, where they maintained Caribbean traditions in these areas, music, food, and mutual support. The cultural influence that the Windrush Generation provided clearly enriched British culture, introducing music, Caribbean music, festivals like our Caribbean Carnival, and language into the mainstream. It would be remiss of me not to also mention that as part of our historical growth in Preston, we have to mention the Jabos and the Caribbean sports and social clubs as major fulcrums of the community. The other area of transition was the political transition, where from silence of this community through to protest. You'll know that early in the before I was born in the late 1950s, the Notting Hill riots that took place that spurred a great deal of activism, albeit down south, but also came up north as well. I do remember a brief spat with political action here in Preston with the National Front as a child. I can't remember what year. I think it was in the 70s, through Deepdale. I do remember getting involved in that. And there were pioneers and organisers amongst us, campaigns like the Bristol bus boycott showed how the Caribbean communities could come together. Again, politically, you'll remember the gang of 4 black politicians that were very popular. The one we have remaining at present on the front benches in Parliament, our Diane, was a very high-profile figure alongside Bernie Grant and Paul Boateng, who unfortunately is not with us any longer. There's an economic transition as well that this generation went through. Having arrived here, as stated earlier, to help to rebuild after the Second World War, were shunned into low-paid work and undervalued work. They worked in the NHS where my mum worked, but then my mum gravitated into the NHS after working in Exton, making bombs. I remember recalling how whilst in the factory they'd test you out in the factory to make sure you're doing your work correctly, and they'd put onto the production line faulty pieces of equipment to check you out. And obviously, with there not being a weapons technician from the Caribbean, obviously failed that particular test, where she then moved on to nursing at the Whittingham Hospital, as was Dad. Well, he came and moved on worked on the railways as a railway engineer, but then gravitated from there to work at Courtaulds in the acid section. I remember very fondly that very, very strong smell of sulphur when it came home. There are barriers to mobility. Many of our Windrush generations were qualified, but yet still denied opportunities for advancement. Over the time, entrepreneurship became a very prominent thing within the community, with attempts over the years of our community developing businesses. You will know of the descendants of our Windrush generation, who were very well established business people in the community. The religion transition. Now, religion was a source of strength and community for many of our Windrush generations. Faith and identity brought our communities very, very close together, particularly the Pentecostal and Adventist traditions, from which I am a product. Church was a sanctuary for this Windrush generation, given the very aggressive and violent environment that they existed in, facing exclusions from the mainstream churches. They formed black majority religious congregations, offering spiritual support and a base for activism in many places. Then there was the personal transition. They came here, and I used to look at my mother from time to time, and I remember when she'd be walking home from work, frighteningly weary, walking up the hill. We lived in Frenchwood. Very, very tired. I wonder what on earth she was doing as a nurse. But it was clear that there was a significant sense of loneliness, cultural dislocation. This environment just isn't like back home. And alienation. Homesickness. I remember I first went to Jamaica when I was 15, so my mother had been here for a good 20 years before we were able to visit her homeland again. When she came here, as you'll probably be aware, most of these Windrush generations would use the term back home. We all understand that term, even though, the term might be, they come into my house, to my home. The phrase back home resonated with every single one of us, meaning it wasn't where you were on this soil, it was elsewhere. ironically, a lot of this Windrush generation found themselves living here permanently, having more descendants, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. This area, one would have assumed, would have become the ground zero for our Windrush generation, and ended up being that. My dad came first to this country in the late 50s, and afterwards came my mother and auntie, Aunt Miracle. Both of them, my mother and my auntie, left children back home. This led to family reunification, where one part of the family starts elsewhere and then joins another part of the family elsewhere, not knowing with each other. It brought stability and tensions. That intention to do better didn't always work out for every single unit. But it was also a new challenge for the younger generations, because of which I'm one. It began to enable the emergence of an identity, a black British identity, a fusion of what mum and dad came from and what we as the next generation coming through were marinated in here and what we were exposed to. But what of the legacy of the Descendants, the Windrush Descendants, who are now taking up the cudgels of our advancement? They are involved in political activism and are at the forefront of anti-racist campaigns, as stated earlier before with Glenda here, very much involved in exposing the clear wrongful detentions and deportations of Caribbean people. Our Descendants are involved in a cultural representation, as in terms of the arts, from grime to dancehall to literature, film. The Windrush Descendants are asserting black British identity in the arts and the media. Also in terms of education and advocacy, young leaders are confronting systematic racism in our schools, universities, the workplaces, and demanding curriculum reform. A lot of which some of us here know is extremely unhelpful to our black children. Our Descendants are building on sacrifice. It's clear that our Windrush generation gave a significant sacrifice in moving thousands of miles to somewhere they know nothing of, yet to face the challenges that they faced. It's amazing what they've enabled us to be able to do, and we must thank them. We'll continue to fight for justice, visibility and equality in British society. So the Windrush generation have endured an adversity to lay the foundations for multicultural Britain. Their journey, marked by strength, dignity and perseverance, continues through their descendants who carry forward the struggle for recognition, justice and equality. Today their legacy not only just in memory but in action, as a new generation picks up the mantle and ensures that the contributions of our Windrush Britons are never forgotten